Good morning, everyone. I had to check the time. Good morning, everyone. I am Michaela L. Carson. I am an author and a coach, and I have Kara Starcher here with me today on our Talk About It Tuesday. She's with Mountain Creek Books, and I'm really excited. We were chatting a little bit before we went live, and I'm really excited about what she has to share and our conversation. Today, we are talking about cover design, interior layout, and some of those things that as writers, we prefer not to think about. We want to focus on the writing, and that stuff will work itself out later. We sort of ignore it until we have to. And so hopefully today in our conversation, we'll share some things with you that will help you not be so afraid of it. Maybe, open your mind up to it's not as complicated as we make it out to be. There are lots of options on how to do this. And within our group here on the Deeper Growth Author Group, we have a lot of support. I mean, there's Kara, there's Carrie. We have several people who are in this group that are writers and also designers. So utilize that. We encourage you to reach out and ask your questions as we go. If you have questions, we are live streaming through StreamYard. So we may not see, if you're on Facebook, we may not see your name or anything like that. So, but we will answer any questions for anyone who's watching live. If you watch later, feel free to ask your questions in the comments, and Kara or I will respond to those as well. So welcome, Kara. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Thank you, Michaela. So I am an editor, a self-publishing coach, and a book designer. So a lot of people think of book design as just like, oh, you make all my headings pretty. There's a lot more that goes into it than that.
So true.
Yes.
So because you just mentioned that, there is a lot that goes into it. And I think because there's like two sides of the coin. There's the people who know there's a lot that goes into it and are really intimidated by that part of the process. And then there's people who think it doesn't really matter. So I want to kind of speak to both of those groups today through our conversation. Okay. But let's start with the complicated. I know I have several clients that I've worked with who are working on their first book. And when they start coaching with me, their mind is set on traditional publishing because they don't know how. That's a lot of the reason. It's twofold. It's either they don't have the resources and funding, or they don't know how to do those things. And what I want to help people understand today is that you don't have to do that part alone. So I think we overcomplicate the things we don't understand. So how can we simplify this for people?
So the self-publishing process, I think I agree with you. A lot of people think it's overly complicated, and it's not. It's a matter of making informed decisions and making sure that what our long-term plan is, the decisions that we make in the beginning fit that plan.
Yes.
So we think it's complicated because there's so much information out there about it. There are the people that are afraid of self-publishing just because they don't know what to do. Or like you said, they may not have the funding for it. And that's true because it can, depending on the length of your book and what you're doing, it can get expensive, especially with editing. But there's so much information out there that we don't know because this person on this blog post says this, but then this person over here says to do that. So how do you know? And that's where we get so confused about everything, and it gets complicated, and we have to sit back,
I appreciate you bringing that up because I think that is one of the reasons I got into coaching was when I wrote my first book. It was exactly that. There's a blog that says whatever you want to believe. And I'm like, right. Okay, but what's the right one? Like, I know there's a right way to do things. And it was very overwhelming. And I think coaching is a great way to help with that too. Like you mentioned that you do coaching, self-editing or self-publishing coaching as well. But I think that is so important because we do get overwhelmed, and having somebody to walk alongside us is so good. The other thing you had mentioned was how do you know which information is right? And I think that is so key, that we have to learn, as Christian writers, especially, we have the discernment of the Holy Spirit. So we need to learn when it comes to our writing to not just believe everything we read and to ask questions. So I think that's a really important point, is to just don't trust. I was really overwhelmed. I ended up going with hybrid publishing on my first book because self-publishing scared me. It was very intimidating. I had the skills to do a lot of it, but I didn't have the time because I was working full-time still, and it was a different place. And so, there's a lot of options in doing this. And like for me, hybrid publishing was the right choice on the first book. I will be self-publishing on the next one. And I'm going to hire
Mhm.
people to do the parts that I'm not comfortable with because you're going to pay either way. You
Right,
pay the hybrid
right.
publisher. This way I can kind of piece it out to the parts that I know I need help with. So in that light, what are the options that are out there? Like how do you figure that out from someone who's in the field and knows? Tell us.
I think it's important that whoever you are taking the information from, like whoever you are believing as the right person, they have experience.
Mm,
There's a bunch of books out there about self-publishing, and you can read them all. They're all going to have different opinions, but then there's ones that are written by people who have been doing this for a while. If you have the advice of somebody who has self-published one book and they decide to share, oh, this is how I did this, that's fine. But then compare it to the people that are basically the experts in the industry. And I could rattle off a bunch of names that are worth following just because they have been doing this. They have been helping authors for years. They know what the best practices are. And when you have, two or three people saying, okay, this is the way to do it, but then you have the experts in the industry saying, no, this is the way to do it, lean towards the experts. Whether they're self-publishing coaches or authors who have sold millions of copies, they know what they're doing. And the other part of self-publishing that makes it complicated is the industry is ever evolving.
mm.
Amazon has made changes, Ingram Spark makes changes. So it's hard to know exactly what it is right now and to stay on top of that as an author. So
That's a really good point.
those of us that work in the industry and we're constantly helping other people, we know what those changes are. And we follow the like industry newsletters and things like that. And that's not something, the average author has time to do. So consult with somebody that does know is the
That's a
biggest thing.
really good
Hire
point.
out. Mhm.
What comes to mind when you were talking about that is like even like people who have a website.
Mhm.
You have a lot of times you hire a web designer to create your website, and then they go away, and now you're supposed to maintain it, but you're not getting those emails. You're not in the
Right.
field. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of areas in writing that kind of that practical discernment thing applies to.
Mhm.
Um, Tell us, I think one of the misconceptions that I hear a lot is so let me just share my experience with hybrid publishing. I chose a hybrid publisher that was reputable. I fully understood my contract. I asked all my questions. They were answered clearly and concisely. Like I felt very good. I had peace about moving forward with this company. And what happened was I paid them a lump sum for a package.
Mhm.
And my package included A, B, C, and D. And they had different packages with different options, but it was a one-time price and it covered all the things that we had agreed to in this package. What I've learned since then, and what I'm going to do, like I mentioned this next round, is I want to utilize more of an a la carte service. So, what
Mhm.
types of things can a writer or an author get a la carte, where you're not having to put a whole package together? Because there was stuff in the package I didn't need, but it's what
Mhm.
they had, and so I paid for it, but I didn't really use it. So, tell me, or tell all of us a little bit about what kind of a la carte options are available.
So there's basically you can hire different editors, and sometimes editors will include more than one level of editing because you have
Mhm,
developmental, line, and copy editing,
mhm,
as well as proofreading. You may not need all of those levels, but if you go with a package deal, sometimes more than what you need is included, like you said, and you're paying for that editing even though your writing's clean enough that you may not need it. Same for with book design. You may be paying for an ebook and decide not to use an ebook. So when you go a la
mhm.
carte, one, you get more attention, I think, than if you go with a hybrid publisher or sometimes even a traditional publisher. Things can be made specifically to how you want them because as individuals, we're used to working with individuals and meeting those individual needs rather than viewing an author as just one of 10. So you're all going to fit into the same box. And with the a la carte services, you're looking at, you could get a very detailed chapter header that you may not get elsewhere because you find a designer who fits the style that you want. Or you can also get little marketing graphics or something like that that a lot of designers include just because.
I think that's a good point also, because I know um, that was one of my concerns with doing hybrid. I didn't actually work with my designer at all. I
Hmm.
had a liaison who I connected with, who then translated my message to the designer, and there was an extra party involved. And
Hmm.
I did feel like it took longer than it needed to
Right.
because of that middle step. Now they were efficient. Again, I had no negative experiences with my company. It was great.
Hmm.
But I learned from that I actually want, just like my cover art, I want to work with an artist. I want to work with the designer who's putting my book together. And the other thing I noticed too is that I don't think they read the books that they work on.
Hmm.
I don't know if that's true for the same with you, but or skim it at least, because I felt like they didn't have
Hmm.
a concept of what the book was about. And I think
Right.
that's kind of important, even if you just read the synopsis of it, to know what you're designing for.
Hmm. Right.
Um,
Uh, you definitely get better attention. And there's that this is going to match your book so much better than, if you use a company that produces 600 covers a year or something like that. Working with an individual designer, you get that individual attention because it's our name that's on it. And our covers are basically the promotion for our business.
True.
So if a good cover is going to bring us more clients.
So let's move into that. How important is the cover?
Oh, very important. Very important. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I know
That
that,
is
but yeah.
that is literally what sells your book because we always hear don't judge a book by its cover, but that's exactly what we do. We
I
look at
wrote a
it, we say,
blog.
"Oh, I love that."
I wrote a blog post literally called "Judge a Book by Its Cover." Like that's the
Hmm.
worst saying ever written, because it's literally what the purpose of the cover is for.
Exactly. You have to see the front cover to pick up the book and look at the back cover. Or you see the front cover and click on the description because why? You love that cover. So it's the design is so important because it's what sells the book. And you can look at a cover, and we've all seen them where we know that it's a homemade cover just because it's just not up to the same caliber as something that would come out of a publishing house. And as a self-published author, you want your cover to be at that same caliber
Yes.
because you are competing against those other books. And covers are important, but so is the inside of the book. If you're somebody that is selling in person, like you are selling at festivals, fairs, book signings, anything like that, where people are going to pick up your book and look at the inside of the book, what that type looks like in there, people will put the book down because the typography on the inside affects the readability. And
Hmm.
if it's a totally wrong font for the genre, they're going to be turned off by it and they'll put the book down. So a lot of times we put so much emphasis on the cover and the cover design, but then the inside is horrible looking. I actually had a book I picked up and it's an author that I read for years and traditionally published, and then she switched to self-publishing. And I picked up the book and I was like, oh, I can't even read this. She used and I know that it was a vellum template, but it was a very bad version of the vellum template. And like the margins were so skinny, like they may have been a quarter inch,
Oh my
which is way
goodness.
too small for a book margin. And so there was like all this type on the page, and it was just the font size was too big. It was obviously a homemade, quick, throw it in there and publish it deal.
That
And
brings up an
I felt
interesting
bad.
that brings up a really interesting point too, because I think
Hmm.
as writers we're creative, right?
Right.
We're creative people. And a lot of writers are creative in other areas. And I think they want to bring that creativity sometimes into their typography. And like,
Right.
that's not where it belongs.
No,
I
no,
love you
no.
guys. I love you enough
Right.
to tell you it does not belong on the page. Let the words
Right.
be creative. Let the type be readable, please.
Right, exactly. You don't need 15-point font on there. The average is right around 11 or 12, depending on the font. And I see so many questions in groups that I'm in, what size font should I use? And a designer is going to know because different fonts are different sizes. So for me to say, okay, you should use 12 point, well, that
Mhm.
depends on what font you're using.
Correct.
A lot of the books that I design, and I'll give you guys a little trick that you can use if you are designing your own book and you're wondering if the size is correct. find a book that you like, and then design a page or two of your book, print it out, go to a window, take the book that you like, take one page, put it up against the window, and then put your page over top of it so that the light goes through and you can see how it lines up with the other
That's a
books.
great trick.
So
That's a great
yeah,
trick.
it's one of those things that I use sometimes when I'm like, okay, does this look exactly right? And you
Yeah.
can see if your character height is the right size. You can see if your lines, you have the right number of lines, the spacing between the lines, those things.
I think
And
one of the things that appeals to me about working with a designer as opposed to doing it myself is not only, again, I have the skill set to do it. Like that's not
mhm,
the challenge for me, but the challenge is I don't have the industry knowledge.
right.
And so like what you're talking about and like yeah, I can look and I can probably gauge if my font sizes are close, but I don't know what industry standards are for fonts in different genres. And
Mhm,
I'm gonna have to
right.
research that, and I'm gonna have to look that up, and I'm gonna have to look up the margins and the bleeds and all of these things that and that's where I think it's not just when we're looking at spending money on something when we're writing a book. Um, Most people know you need to pay for professional editing, and
Mhm,
that's the budget marker that they have. And I agree that that's probably the number one or number two, depending on your thought process. But the cover design and the interior, unless you have the margin and the time to do all that research and learn a brand new skill,
mhm,
that's time too. You know, that there's money in
right.
that too. So like
Mhm,
I think it's important for people to think that through. You know, if you're a full-time writer, that might look different for you. Maybe you have the margin to, you know, research 10 hours a week and learn how to
mhm,
do that. And that's awesome. Good for you.
right.
There's nothing wrong with that, but make sure you're doing the research. Don't just, like you were saying earlier with that one author, don't just throw it on a page and say, okay, I self-published
Mhm,
because it's going to affect your sales.
right. Exactly. And I think it's important. Time is money when it comes to these kinds of things. We can invest this time into learning how to design things, but is that really the best thing for us? Could we be working on the next book? Or could we be building our marketing campaign? And where it's going to take somebody, it might take them a week to design the inside of their book, maybe longer by the time that they learn everything. By hiring a professional, you could have a fully designed book back to you in a couple days. It
Mm,
and the average book will take, well, the custom design, just to give you guys an idea, a custom design will take about, I don't know, I usually spend about 3 full days, so 8-hour days, coming up with the design, making sure it matches the book, getting the author's approval, going through the whole process. And then it's going line by line, page by page to make sure everything is exactly right. And a lot of people don't understand necessarily the time that's involved because you can put your book into a template, but you still should go page by page through the book.
that's a
And
great point. Also, let me
mhm,
bring this up really quick. If you're watching right now and you don't know what a widow or an orphan is, you should not be
exactly.
designing your interior.
Yes,
I'm
I
just
was
going to be
getting ready to
honest with
talk
you.
about those.
If you don't know what those are, you don't know to look for them, and you're going to have issues in your
Hmm.
book. Kara, I'm assuming you know what a widow and an orphan is.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
And the
So,
other thing that a lot of people don't think about is what we call runs,
mm,
which they're those single words or two short words by themselves at the end of a paragraph. And I use Adobe InDesign and I have character level control, so I can move those so that they go back up into the paragraph and you have a longer line at the end of the paragraph. There's something about them, about the eye control and our ability to read, and they actually kind of hinder the reading speed when there's these little short words at the end of a paragraph.
that brings up, I keep saying that brings up, but it does. So when I paid someone to do my interior design, but the
Mhm.
amount of proofreading I had to do because they did not do that part.
Right.
They did not look for awkward breaks. They did not look at like I had to go through my manuscript so many times to find those things, even with and that was with a hybrid publisher. So you just kind of sold me even more on having an individual designer because that was so time and labor intensive for me to go through and then have to like fill out their form to tell them, okay, these are the changes you need to make. And I'm like, they should know to make these changes. Like it was frustrating
Right. Right.
because I felt like
And
as a
the other
designer, they should know that.
Right. And the other thing that's important when it comes to design, especially for the inside of the book, make sure it's the final version of your manuscript. Because once we lay out the book and then you make a change on the first page of chapter 5, and chapter 5's 10 pages long, that little change that you make on the first page of chapter 5 can affect the rest of chapter 5. All of the lines can shift. Everything, what was on page 3 is now on page 4. And so you got to go back through the whole chapter just because, oh, well, I decided to change her hair from blonde to blue or something,
Yeah.
where it's something subtle, but it can affect the whole chapter. And
That's
sometimes even shifts the rest of the book, depending on what the change is.
I had that. I mean, I had some edits in that stage that were, I guess they were my edits, but it did everything I had done. I had to do again because it shifted. It
Right,
shifted.
right.
Some were
It's
pull
not something
quotes.
we think about,
Yeah,
right?
I had some pull quotes that I had added, and that of course shifted all the paragraphs and all the things, and then
Mhm.
I had to redo. Yeah, so you had mentioned something, and I just lost what it was, but I was like, oh, that's a really good point that wasn't even on our list. No, I can't remember what it was. It was good though. Oh, the final copy. I think that was what it was.
Mhm.
Where I was going is, we didn't talk about timeline, but this part of designing the interior is after the editor, after your professional editing is
Mhm.
done. The
Mhm.
final thing you do is design the interior, and then the final editing step is proofreading.
Right.
And the
And
proofreading is for a lot of those formatting issues, really, more than it is about
right.
people use proofreading when they mean editing.
Mhm.
Proofreading is a printed copy of your manuscript that's about to go to the printer. Like that's
Right.
when you proofread. You don't proofread at the beginning of your manuscript. You proofread at the end because you're looking
Mhm.
at formatting. You're looking at those breaks and how it all lays out on the page and that kind of thing. So that's a good point.
Right. You're looking at the page
Timeline.
numbers, the page folios, chapter headers, making sure one of the things they check for is consistency. Did we miss, formatting one of the chapter numbers, or are the titles, is capitalization wrong in it, or something like that? So it's the little tiny things, making sure that the table of contents matches the page numbers. It's things like that that happen in proofreading. It should not be a light copy edit, which
No,
if you do a light copy edit at that stage, your designer is going to charge you for all the extra work that it creates. Because,
logically,
like I
that
said,
makes sense.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Sometimes you'll see people saying, "Oh, well, your designer should make changes for free." Depending, as I include, so many little changes. Okay, that's fine. You want to change this? That's fine. We'll do that as part of the fee. But then I'm sorry, but when there's 3 pages worth of changes, I have to charge you for that because that's my time invested in that.
So through
So,
through the hybrid publishing that I did, I had, I believe it was 20 or 25 changes that I was allowed.
mhm, right.
That was changes that I was making. Now,
Hmm.
changes to as far as proofreading, like this line break is awkward or the formatting is wrong here,
Hmm.
those kinds of things they didn't charge you for.
Right.
But
Right.
anything that was specific to me changing the copy,
Hmm.
I was surprised at how limited it was. I was like, okay, I
Right.
need to make sure this is so clean that I don't have any
Right.
issues. And I think I used 3 of them actually
Hmm.
out of 25. So I was really proud of myself. But yeah, that is a big issue. And we touched on cover design really quick a little bit ago, but I wanted to talk about that for a second too. I'm in a couple of different writing groups, and I think Kara, you and I are in some of the same ones. And a lot of times,
Hmm.
authors will post, "Here's my cover. What do you guys think?" And so I just want you to speak into that as a professional in the industry. Um, what matters about cover? Whose opinion should we be seeking? How does that work?
The things that matter about covers, I'll start with that. Number one is your title. Is it readable? And number two, is it on genre? If you do not know what your genre covers look like, find out and go to the library, go to the bookstore,
Mm.
stand there and look at where your book would be. Does it look or will it look like the other covers that are there? And you can also, look on Amazon or Barnes and Noble. But sometimes in there you can get some covers mixed in there that are not good. So it's important, if you can, to go to an actual bookstore or library and look at the other covers and also make sure that they are current covers because cover design
Mm.
trends change. One of the ones that is held fairly steady is historical fiction. Those covers tend to look the same, but then you get into other genres. I know, like the somewhere in the paranormal mystery, the cozy mystery genre, that has changed a lot in cover design. There's a lot more illustrated covers out there now. with like the little flat people and like little cupcakes and things like that. That's totally different than what it was 5 years ago.
It's true.
So, yeah. So you have to make sure that you're looking at current covers and comparing your cover to that. Some of the things that you can make sure is your title should take up about the top third of the cover, depending on how long your title is. And then your author name should be readable. Some people are like, well, I don't want the attention. It doesn't matter. You wrote a book, you get the attention for it. Make your author name readable so people know who wrote the book. So it's important that we look and
It's
compare
really
to
helpful in
other things.
marketing when you're writing more books later too.
Yes, exactly. So people know, like, oh, wait, I recognize that name because why? Number one, I can read it. Number two, I remember her books, you know.
Speaking of that, I'm hoping in March for our Talk About It Tuesday, I'll have on someone to talk about marketing a little bit, but I attended one of her classes. And one of the things that she said that was so valuable is your cover becomes your branding for your marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that cover design is so important. And you don't actually want to wait till the end to do your cover design because you want to start marketing your book before it's finished. You want to know what the color palette's going to be. You want to know what the font's going to be. So it's okay to have your cover designer work on it earlier in the process and do the interior design later. But the marketing part of it, like, it's so true because like all of my branding came out of my first book. My second book's going to look a little different. I'm using the same artist, so it'll have the same feel, but the color palette and everything's going to be different. So I think that that's important. Like, as you get into the marketing part of this, your cover becomes your I can't think of the word, but like your template of what you're going to use. It's going to have your fonts. It's going to have your colors. It's going to have your imagery. All of those things are going to directly connect to the cover of your book. So for marketing, that's going to matter too.
Right. And it's important. What I recommend for people is when you send your manuscript to your editor, that's downtime for you. Start working on that cover if you haven't already. Find that designer, have things lined up so that when the book goes to the editor, you can start working with that designer one-on-one. And one of the things I do want to mention is the more information that you provide to your designer, the better cover you're going to get. Some people are kind of like, okay, I need a cover. All right, what color do you want? What do you want to see on the front? Well, I don't know.
What's the genre?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but if you can say, okay, look, I need a woman in an 1860s dress with a Civil War soldier with mountains in the background, with a barn and a house and a this and a that and all these other things, that designer will be so much ahead when it comes to your cover, and you're going to get sample covers that match your vision versus you having to say, well, that's not really what I want.
And I do think that's an advantage of nonfiction. I know for both of my books, I had the cover idea almost before I'd started writing the book because I had there's an imagery or an allegory or something that connects to the book that I wanted to reflect on the front. So I think that that's a little bit easier when you're writing fiction. I feel like the story can you don't know where it's going until you write it. So you got to be careful that like you said, if you change your hair from blonde to blue, that's going to matter on the cover.
Right. That matters on the cover. Right. But hopefully by the time that you're doing your cover, you do know what their hair color is.
Yeah.
But, you should if you're sending it to the editor at that point. But the basics that would go with the cover you should know those. And nonfiction can be it can be a lot easier, but it can also be a lot harder because fiction, you have those concrete things within your story. Nonfiction is more abstract, I guess you could say, with what might go on the cover. So that's where it's important that you go to the store and look at the trending covers in your genre. What's out there? What does this typically look like?
That explains why so many devotionals have butterflies and flowers. Because they just want you to know they're for women.
Right. Yes, that's it's a little indicator,
Yeah. And that, I mean, not that those aren't pretty, they're beautiful.
Right.
But it doesn't really communicate to the reader or the person looking at that cover in the Christian bookstore or whatever, that this is what I need. I never have looked at a book with a butterfly and I thought, oh, I need that. Like, if it's pretty, I'm like, oh, that's really pretty. I want it framed to hang it on my wall. But like, that's not the same as like wanting to read the book. So
exactly.
The pretty covers are nice, but they don't actually help you sell books in my experience.
Right. The cover needs to speak to what that book is, and somebody needs to say, oh, wow, I need to pick this book up, turn it over, and read the back. And if you're in a position where you don't have the ability to pay for a cover designer, but you really feel like that your book needs to be out there, create a cover and then get feedback on it. And Michaela and I were talking about this before we went live. You can post it in a Facebook group and ask for feedback, but be careful of whose feedback you're accepting, because there's going to be people like, oh, it's great, it looks wonderful. And then you'll have professionals in the industry that tell you otherwise and give you recommendations on things to fix. And I think that's important, that if you are getting feedback, pay attention to who you're listening to and look for the ones that can give you specifics, that will say, okay, you need to make your title bigger, or that's the wrong image, or colors are wrong, it's too bright and vibrant for the genre, things like that.
Okay. That's so
Look
good.
for helpful feedback about those things.
That is so good. I'm so grateful. Kara, thank you so much for taking time this morning to connect with all of us on
Oh,
the
you're
group.
welcome.
Kara is part of our group, so you can find
Mhm.
her information on our resource file of for all the things that she does, editing, design, all the good
Mhm.
stuff. She's in there, and I told her she can go ahead and put in the comments her contact info when we're finished up here too. So if you want to reach out to
Mhm.
her, you're welcome to do that. Next month on Talk About It Tuesday, it's February 13th. We're going to be on with Jen Breeze, who is a marketing person, and we're going to be talking about author bios and book blurbs, which is everybody's least favorite thing to
Mhm.
write. So Jen's going to come on. She's going to have some great tips and advice for us. She actually helped with my bio and my book blurb, so I highly recommend her for that. She calls it a polish, but definitely worth it. So we're going to talk about that next month. Mark it on your calendars, and we're excited for that. So again, thank you, Kara. Have a great
Oh,
rest
you're
of your
welcome.
day,
Thank
and we'll talk
you.
soon. All right.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.